Nikki, and this is Health Check. Today at Health Check, we're going to talk a lot about carbohydrates and why this is important for our body. I'm going to be using the word carb because it's the short form for carbohydrates, and it is a very, very common short form for this macro. What is carb? Well, carb is the main source of energy for our body to function. Well, our body is primarily using glucose as a source of energy. Normally, if we don't train our body, that's the only main and primary source of energy that our cells and in general our body is relying in order to get energy. We can find carbs in many different products, for example, rice, bread, potatoes, you might not know, but dairy, fruits, and a lot of other products are also considered carbs. Anything that in our body breaks down into glucose is considered carbohydrates. And why glucose or carbs are very important for our body? Because in order for us to build more muscle, in order for us to function in general, we need enough carb and energy to be able to live a healthy life. However, it is very, very, very important. I can't emphasize on this enough that what source of carbohydrates you're receiving when it comes to your healthy lifestyle and healthy body. Because a lot of people think that, okay, if it's carb, well, my body needs it and I have to take enough carbs. And they might go to different sources in order to get those calories and carbs in their body. However, it is surprising how different kind of carbs are how they are affecting our body. For example, refined sugar is a source of carb because in our body it will turn into glucose and eventually it will affect our insulin. But the only thing about refined sugar is that it doesn't have any nutrition value, and therefore there's no mineral, vitamins, protein, fiber in this product, and that's why it doesn't do anything good for our body. However, when we consume complex carbs such as sweet potato, white potato, brown rice, white rice, any sort of beans like lentils, red kidney beans, and any sort of beans, we give our body a source of complex carbs, and that's why it's going to take a longer time for our body to break down that carbohydrates and turn it into glucose, and then eventually serve our cells with those energy. So some of the sources that your body would be happy to have carbs from are, as I mentioned, brown rice, white rice, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, quinoa, couscous, farro. There are so many different carbs, complex carbs that our body can consume, and you can still be in a great shape and have a healthy lifestyle. That is why it is very important for our body to, like for ourselves, to be educated, to know what our body needs and what our body doesn't need. Because sometimes we might hear many different stories from different people, from different studies, and we might use it in our daily life, and at the end of the day we realize, oh, that's not the right program for me, that's not the right plan for me, and we're gonna give our body a lot more stress than we need it. and that's why that sometimes we gain weight and it's much harder for it to lose it. So when you are choosing your carbs, make sure you're choosing the right source and you're giving your body enough source of energy, because even if you give the right source of energy, but if you give them in a bigger portion, you're forcing your body to store some of it and then turn the rest of it, the excess amount of carbohydrate, and turn it into fat and store it around your belly, your arms, your legs, and that's gonna, and your liver, and that's when you're not gonna be happy with your body. Well, glucose is the type of sugar that our cells use in order to get the energy. And how our body is breaking this carb into glucose and eventually give it to our cells is that when we eat something, the sugar goes into our liver, and eventually it will send a signal to our pancreas, and our pancreas will release a hormone called insulin. When insulin is in our blood, it will take the glucose and serve it to our cells in order to get the energy for our day-to-day work. However, when our cells get enough of that carb, that glucose, excuse my typo, when our cells use that amount of glucose, then it will send another signal to our other organs that, okay, I'm done. I had enough of my glucose, and now you can store the rest of the glucose that it is in our blood. So there are different part of our body that can store that glucose, and when again this happens, again insulin would come and take that excess amount of glucose and store it in our, for example, muscles, liver, kidneys, and brain, and many other organs. However, the main and primary places that the glucose will be stored is mostly our liver, kidney, and muscles. And whenever our body is low at glucose, a signal will go to our organs and release that insulin and glycogen, and then send it back to our cells. However, when there is even more than our stored energy needed in our body, then again insulin will come in the picture, and it will take that excess glucose and turn it into fat, and will dump it into our liver and kidney, and then as well as our belly. Because let's put it this way, only in order our body to store glucose and use it for later, we have only a very, very limited capacity. Let's say, if I'm not mistaken, it's 1700 calories for glucose. However, in terms of storing fat, we have a huge tank, which is like maybe 70,000 calories for fat. That's why we can store a lot more fat than glucose. That's why our body will quickly turn the excess glucose and will store it in our belly and other places as a source of fat. As I said, choosing the right carb and source is very important, because that will affect our metabolism, and that will affect our storing processes. Therefore, choosing carbs, for example, brown rice or oats, are the smartest idea, because they are filled with fiber, which it slows down the process of breaking down and turning that carb into glucose and eventually giving it to our cells. And because it takes much longer for our body to break down this process, our body has to work harder and will use a lot of our stored energy, which is our stored glycogen. And that's why there's going to be, again, room for the next package, or the next portion of our energy sources, which is glycogen and glucose. And it can be balanced in our body. So these are very, very important information, and it is very important for people to understand these processes, because then they can understand their body and they can give their body the best nutrients and the best energy sources in order to work well and get the best result in their day-to-day life. They can think better, they can function better, they can, it affect, like, there are a lot of studies that shows when you have a healthier habit, healthier lifestyle, healthier eating diet, your decision making is better, and you can have a better outcome in your life. So be very wise when you're choosing your carbohydrates, and make sure that you're staying away from refined sugar and anything that can give you sugar or insulin spike. And make sure you choose the complex carbs rather than the simpler carbs. I hope these are good information and easy to understand. However, if you have any questions, you can always send me an email, and you can reach me on my Instagram account, which is Glutelicious.mo, and I will answer to your questions. Get a break, and we're gonna come back with a lot of more and useful information. To health check. So earlier we talked about carbohydrates and why is it important to choose the right source of carbohydrate, and what does it do to your body if you don't choose it wisely. So now I wanted to focus more on the sugar and what happens in our body when we consume carbs, and it breaks down in our body. And on a side note, if you guys have any questions, make sure you send me an email. It is nakisa.yeganeh1@gmail.com, and I will always get back to your questions for our next session. And you can also find me on Instagram, Glutelicious.mo, and that's also another source for you to send me all your questions, and I will answer the questions next time in Health Check. So going back to sugar, when we eat carb, it breaks into in our body into two different sources of sugars. So it's gonna break into fructose or glucose. But they're both sugar. However, the metabolizing these two different sugars are very different. So main carbs that when it comes to our body, it will be broken down and turned into fructose as fruits. So fruits, because they have a lot of fiber in them, mostly, it's very different than just the fructose itself. When we eat fructose, for example, a lot of corn syrups, a lot of the sugar, the table sugar that we consume is made out of fructose, sucrose, which in our body will break down into fructose and glucose, and then our body will use it. However, because the sugar, the table sugar, doesn't have any fiber in it, the fructose will act as a missile and then directly goes to your liver, and it will affect the insulin level, which is released by your pancreas, and it gets into a very nasty story, which we don't want to get into it right now, or it will lead to type 2 diabetes. So sugar, when it's released in our body, again, it will turn into fructose or glucose as two sources of like energy, sugars, and our body will react differently to these kind of sugars. So glucose is the main source of energy, the primary source of energy that we use, but also fructose is a source of energy for our body, which is mostly, like I would say 90% of the fructose is used by your liver. And the rest, boom, will turn into fat very quickly. Some of it will turn into glucose, and then the rest will turn into fatty acids and eventually fats. Fructose will be stored into your organs such as liver, and while you're sleeping, your body will use that fructose for your vital acts. And that's why the fructose is only can be stored in a very like limited amount, because it's only our liver which can break it down and use it as a source of energy, and has the enzymes to break it down. So fructose will turn into two different sources like fat and glucose, and then the rest will be stored in our liver. So why fructose in our fruits are okay, but it's not okay if we have it through corn syrup or other sorts of refined sugar? Well, when we eat fruit, because it has a lot of fiber in it, it slows down the process of moving fructose to your liver and your body to react to it. And because it takes longer, your body won't have access to fructose right away, and therefore it won't turn into fat right away. However, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you can eat as much as fruit as you want and your body won't change at all. Well, everything has to be moderate, and you should also be consuming fruits that have a lot of fibers in them. For example, berries. Blueberries are a very good source of fruit that also has a lot of fiber in it. So going back to glucose and fructose, glucose will be used as fuel, but fructose will turn into fat and won't be used as a source of fuel unless we push our body through processes to be able to use that stored fat as a source of energy, which I'm going to get to it very soon. So when our body is exposed to sugar and goes back to your blood and then to your cells, it's when the insulin goes up. So when there's glucose in our bloodstream, there's a lot of insulin in our blood. And that's why our body is not going to be able to use fat as a source of energy and will solely rely on glucose as that source of energy. So it is important, if your goal is to use your stored fats as a source of energy, to make sure you don't consume food that affects your insulin level significantly. That is why a lot of researchers they've done so many studies on intermittent fasting, where you fast for 12 hours and you eat portions of food, and then you won't eat anything in between those portions. In order for your body to be pushed to use your stored fat, you have to bring your insulin level very low, and that is why it is pretty it works for our body, because during those periods, those gaps for our body to not eat anything, your body will be pushed to use fat as a source of energy and not glucose, because using fat doesn't need anything, but glucose needs something. I always say acting as a device to take the glucose from your blood and take it to your cell. So as I mentioned, the fiber will affect the behavior of fructose, and it won't act as a missile and won't target your liver to cause that that process where the fructose will turn into fat. Now, it is kind of out of our control when we are relying on sugar and mostly refined sugar as one of the sources of carbs to put it away, because sugars are addictive. And the reason is, when we eat sugar, a good feeling neurotransmitters will release in our body, which is addictive. Like when people do drugs, they have the same hormone release in their body, and that's why they get addicted to substances. And it's the same thing with sugar. When you consume a lot of sugar, your body will be addicted to it, and you keep getting sugar craving. However, it is not as hard to be able to cut your sugar and slowly get that withdrawal. Well, the way you can get rid of that addiction is adding a lot of fiber to your diet, adding a lot of protein to your diet. This will help your body to work harder to break down those substances in our body, those macros in our body, and it won't crave for sugar as much. And it is very important to consume a lot of healthy fats in order to adjust your sugar cravings. So, because with healthy fats present in our bloodstream, you won't get as much sugar craving as you normally would do. So now, why we say that sugar is very bad for our body, and why it's considered one sort of addiction. Well, there has been many studies that shows people who consume sugar get wrinkles much faster than someone who's very conscious and cautious about their sugar intake. People who consume sugar more than others get older faster, and their performance decreases significantly. And these are all studies that has been done in Harvard school and in many well-known schools. So if you want to know the exact reasons behind why sugar affects your aging process, then you should definitely go on their website and check it out. Also, once again, if you guys have any questions, make sure that you send it through email to me, and I will answer them for our next session in Health Check. Going back to sugar, the other reason that sugar is very bad for our body is that refined sugar is empty calories. Means it will cause your body to gain weight and to work hard. However, because it doesn't have any minerals, vitamins, protein, fiber, it's just empty calories, and you're giving your body more than what it needs, because you can get those calories from protein and like other useful nutrients, and your body will work harder in order to break those macros down, and will burn more calories, and you will look healthier and more fit. The third reason is that sugar will cause type 2 diabetes. Of course, like you have to eat a lot of sugar, which normally, like at least in North America, people are consuming about 31 spoons of sugar a day, which for your normal activity and for you to be healthy, you should have only one, which is about 20 to 28 grams of sugar in an entire bloodstream, which is your entire body. But when we go and look into our diet, we realize we are consuming a lot of sugar, about 31 to 35 spoons of sugar a day, which is ridiculous. And eventually it will cause insulin resistant, and eventually leads to type 2 diabetes. The next reason that sugar is bad for us is that, as I mentioned earlier, sugar, especially table sugar, is made out of sucrose, which is eventually in our body breaks into fructose and glucose. And as I mentioned earlier, fructose will turn into fat when it's in stays in our body and doesn't get stored. So that again leads to gaining a lot of fat around our bellies, around our arms, around our thighs, and that's why people mostly in North America seem to be a little bit overweight because they are not aware of the amount of sugar that they consume. I actually have here a list of all the things that you might be eating and you don't know that how much sugar is in there. So some of the common things that we think they're healthy and there's not much sugar in it is agave, which is healthy. Like you think that, okay, it is natural, so why not consuming it? But that also will affect your insulin level significantly. Almond milk ice creams, balsamic vinegars, if they're not organic, if they're like, you have to always look at the nutrition label to make sure that they don't add a lot of sugar in it. But normally speaking, they add a lot of sugar to those bottles of vinegars, balsamic vinegars. Asian dressings, a lot of sugar. Barbecue sauce, beer, alcohol, buckwheat, brown sugar, black bean flour, coconut sugar, so many, like I can give you thousands of things that we eat daily that has a lot of sugar. So it is very important when you are buying stuff, you have to look at their nutrition label to see how much sugar is in there, to make sure that you're not giving your body excess sugar. So when we consume sugar, we get insulin spike, and when we get insulin spike, our body gets tired sooner because it will solely focus on glucose and insulin to take it to our body, and then our body gets full from it, and then it's like, okay, there's a lot of still sugar and insulin in our bloodstream, so it has to work harder, and then eventually it won't respond to insulin properly, and then it will cause into insulin resistance, where your body has to work harder and release a lot more insulin in order to give your body to work as much. So take a break, stay tuned, and when we come back, I'm going to talk more about this topic and give you the choices that you can have in order to have a healthier lifestyle, diet routines, and meanwhile enjoy your meals. Avoid having fast carbs or simple carbs. When you eat simple carbs, your body will get a lot of insulin all at the same time in order to go and bring that glucose down. Because when you are having a simple carb, there's not much fiber, or there's a very, very little amount of fiber in it, and therefore the sugar in the bloodstream is very high in a very, very short given time, and that's why you get an insulin spike, and in order for your body to bring that glucose down. So it will give a quick hit of energy, but then it will quickly go down, and then your body will tire. So that's why when we have a breakfast that is made out of simple carbs, for example, like refined sugar, like cakes, or things that we bake, and we don't include oats or complex carbs in our diet, we get hungry faster in the mornings, and we get tired, and our body crashes very soon after our breakfast. So In order to avoid those insulin spikes, make sure you consume food that has a lot of fiber in it. So when we talk about carbohydrates, I have to mention that most of our, like the primary source of our carbs are coming from starchy foods. Starch is the phrase that explains the molecules of the carbohydrates. So when we talk about starchy foods, we're talking about the foods that have higher amount of carbs in it. For example, potatoes are starchy foods, where there is, for example, in a given amount of potatoes, there's 15 grams of carb and it contains like about 80 calories. Whereas where we talk about broccoli, because it is non-starchy, it doesn't have as much starch in it, and that's why it's called non-starchy. Therefore, there's only a minimum amount of carb in it, and it has only 25, let's say, calories in a cup. So it is important that you stick, if you are on a limited carb diet, stick with non-starchy diets, vegetables. And here I have a list of some of the non-starchy vegetables that you can consume. For example, lettuce, mushrooms, parsley, greens, eggplant, broccolis, cauliflower, green beans, onions, cabbage, cucumber, and these are the non-starchy vegetables. And when you have to choose from slow carbs or complex carbs, then you can stick with black beans, French beans, grapefruit, believe it or not, persimmons, like I love persimmons, and lentils, oranges, and pumpkin. So, and also, as I mentioned earlier, carbs, complex carbs such as brown rice, and all of that are very good to include. Adding a lot of starches to your diet. Starches comes mostly from vegetables. So there are different types of starches, but normally starches will digest because of the enzymes that are secret in our body, released in our body. And in order to break it down and because it's like a longer chain of sugars connected to each other, our body has to work much harder to break down these starches. So again, it will slow down the process of breaking it down, so you're going to be full much longer, and your body has to work harder in order to break those chains down, and therefore you have to burn more calories. So speaking of starches, as I mentioned, there are different type of starches, and the other one is a resistant starch. So these starches won't break down until it gets to your colons. And I have to mention that when you have starches in your daily nutrients, it will allow the fat to move easily through your intestines, and your body won't absorb the fat as much. So that also helps to like your bowel movement to be more consistent, and it's much more easier for your intestines to be emptied. The other very important factor when it comes to glucose and carbohydrates, as I mentioned from the beginning of today's program, is fibers. Fibers are our heroes when it comes to weight loss and in general maintaining a great weight and body shape, because fibers are slowing down the processes, and they will adjust the insulin and the blood sugar, and therefore we won't our body works more smoothly, and it needs a lot of energy to break down all of these products that are added to our body. So when we are talking about carbs. There's so much to consider if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to gain weight, and that's why that you need a proper guidance if you don't have enough information about diet and nutrition. In order for you to get the best result, you must choose your sources very wisely, and you must have the right routine. You must have a lot of protein, fiber, vegetables, starches, and good fat, healthy fat in your diet. And the portions are very important. So make sure if you have any questions, you send me an email. I can answer to your questions. And you could also join me in my online training program, and there I can explain everything from A to Z to you and give you the best guidance that affects your lifestyle and that suits best your routine and your body type, because again, it is very different from one person to another based on their body types, how their body would react to different carbs, different fat. Some people can't have different versions of proteins. So based on your blood types, you get different diet and nutrients. So if you guys have any questions, make sure you come to my page, send me questions through email, through my Instagram, and I will make sure that I answer to your questions on our next program on Tuesday.